All right, welcome all in for another episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zack Farmer alongside Thomas Dunn, and we've got a lot to get to. We've got a few more of the non-conference schedules that have been released. We have some news from St. Mary's as far as their schedule goes. Obviously, we're still waiting for the whole thing. We'll get to that. Bart Torvik released its predictions. We're going to get into that. But Thomas, we're only maybe a little bit more than 2 months out from the start of the college basketball season. We're 1 week out from the or only a few days away from the Labor Day holiday. So it feels like the countdown is finally on.
Things are rounding into form, and it's an exciting time. And I think you look at the scope of college athletics, everything's getting underway. It's a good time to be ready to go. And we're seeing more schedules leak out. And I think we're excited at some of the prospects and raising our eyebrows at some others. So I'm excited to go tackle them.
Yeah. And starting next week, we will be starting our season previews, our team previews. We're going to be kicking it off with San Diego and Seattle. So we'll get into those as we get deeper into the week. And then next week, we'll have that episode for you on that one. All right. But we are going to start with what we saw in the Bart Torvik preseason predictions. The T-rank predictions came out just a few days ago, and there are definitely some interesting notes here of what we're going to see. And one of them is where St. Mary's, where Gonzaga, and obviously where USF are at the very top. And as we start to kind of like look into what we're seeing, as I get these banners properly put in. Here we go. The Torvik predictions: Gonzaga at 24, St. Mary's 54, USF 64, Santa Clara and Oregon State rounding up in the top 100, Seattle at 118, LMU 135. Then you see the rest: Washington State, San Diego, and all the way down. What was your kind of initial reaction as you started to kind of think about this? What pops in your head as you've seen these early predictions?
So I have two initial thoughts, one from towards the top of the board, one towards the bottom. The first one is Gonzaga and St. Mary's obviously being separated by 30 points, according to Bart Torvik. And I think the evidence is clear over the course of the last 3 seasons or so is that the difference between those two teams is not 30 spots. So whatever the course correction is, and we know St. Mary's likes to punch above its weight over the course of a regular season, and obviously their inherent cap is the way they play in the NCAA tournament. Whereas Gonzaga, maybe they don't flourish as much in the regular season, but if a Mark Few coach team can and will go far in the NCAA tournament if they're playing their best basketball. So I look at that gap and I'm like, I'm not 100% convinced that that's the correct analysis at this time. And I think you look at the teams compared to the last few seasons, I don't think they're firing on all 8 cylinders compared to years past. I think there's a lot more questions than people are used to surrounding those programs heading into this upcoming season. So while they should still be 1 and 2, given what they've done and what their stature is and who they still have on their team, I don't think the question is 30 spots between those two squads. And you look at San Francisco, Santa Clara, obviously right there. They're teams that they're ready to knock on the door, but then again, they have to reprove themselves with retooled rosters. And I'm not so sure that the difference, at least between St. Mary's and Santa Clara, being almost the same as Gonzaga, St. Mary's, I don't really view that as an equal comparison at this time. So that's kind of my first reaction. The other one is I'm not sure if they've over course corrected on Washington State based on what happened last year. So obviously, for those unaware, Washington State basically fielded a hospital team by the end of the season. And they suffered, honestly, their mental upkeep was probably their biggest detractor compared to their physical play. They couldn't sustain when a team went on a run, they kind of collapsed, and it was a very repeating cycle till the very end of last season. And obviously, David Riley has to retool his roster. You lose Cedric Coward, you lose Nate Calmise, Isaiah Watts, the likes of them. I'm not 100% sure that Washington State will end up that low, at least, fighting against LMU, San Diego. It's a little bit wait and see on that one. But I think they would be the team that I would look at as to say, I look at this now, they can make a jump. They have a coach who has a proven ability of winning games and winning a regular season conference championship at Eastern Washington. So Washington State's the team that I'm like, okay, we'll see. I'm going to pencil them in as the team I'm going to watch.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on Washington State. That does seem a bit low on them. And maybe the one thing, I mean, you kind of brought it up atop the 30 spot difference between a Gonzaga and a St. Mary's. I agree with that. But I also would say, like, again, the 54 and 64 of St. Mary's and USF seem low to me. And I do think that both of those teams are going to outperform what their rankings are right now, especially when you think about what USF has been able to bring in. I'm high on USF going into the year. You look at what they've done in the for the non-conference schedule, and obviously we'll get into that in a little bit. But I think they've put themselves in a really good position. They have a lot of the key guys back. I think we expect to see some big jumps, especially when you talk about Ryan Beasley and Tyrone Riley as being like kind of like the 1-2 punch for this squad. I would 64 seems low to me. But again, we're looking at preseason predictors and what that's going to look like. That doesn't take into account what guys are going to look like in their second year, their third year, and what developmental jump that they have year over year. The other one that kind of like jumps out at me is obviously it's Seattle at 118. That's the one that kind of like kind of screamed at, like, this is a very good sign early on for the Red Hawks and what this team and what at least the metrics say that this team is capable of doing this year, being ahead of LMU, being ahead of Washington State, being there right behind Oregon State and Santa Clara for those 4 or 5 spots. We know that Seattle was able to bring in a good amount of pieces. There's a lot of veteran experience, and this team is going to be a defensive first squad. So that is something that might play kind of well in the WCC, where you have a lot of teams that are focused on the offensive end. But you look at the success that, like, obviously St. Mary's has had being a defensive first team in this conference. And because it's not exactly like the norm of most of the squads, it's something that can throw some teams off. So Seattle's seeing them there is definitely a something to watch. And then just thinking about the totality, 9 teams in the top 150. So I think that's, again, another good sign when you think about opportunities of hitting the road. Like, so that means that even right now, obviously things are going to change rapidly, whatever else, that San Diego, which is at that 150 mark, is still a quad 2 game on the road. So that's a big thing for when you think about what it's going to look like, the conference schedule and all that sort of things. Obviously now that's a quad 3 if you're sitting at home. But I think it does speak to at least the level of depth that when you think about a San Diego, which a lot of people are also high on, there's going to be some depth and length to this WCC schedule. And even the likes of Pacific, who I think is going to probably punch above their weight a little bit more, that you do see some length and some serious challenges up and down, regardless of, I think, what the Bart Torvik rankings are saying early on.
You know, I think definitely there'll be less off nights. It's kind of like the one thing that comes to mind. And these road games, road battles, you're gonna have to bring it. And I think a lot of the coaches have been consistent over the course of the years, and you hear them in press conferences saying, like, you take an off night in this league, you will get beat. I mean, you ask Washington State, they lost Pacific twice last year. Like, that's something along those lines. You can easily drop a game. Santa Clara losing at LMU. Just those 2 quick examples off the bat right there. So I think naming a team like Seattle who can do something, San Diego, I do think the jury's out on them, obviously, compared to what happened last year, and obviously a big retool for Steve Lavin. So intrigued to see what they do there. But like you mentioned, I do understand the competitive depth of this league, and I do think it's something that will be in the plus of the conference, and we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out over the course of the season.
Yeah, a lot of these preseason ranks will be starting to pop up. We're obviously waiting on Ken Palm to see what it's going to look like over there. Probably won't be too different from what we've seen from Bart Torvik, but again, we'll kind of see, like, again, those year-over-year predictors of what these teams have been, and what we're going to see moving forward is going to at least like give us a early blueprint of what we might see in the first few weeks of the season. Now, one of the things we saw was that 3 teams have released their non-conference schedules over the last couple weeks, one of which is San Francisco. And their schedule, honestly, this might be one of the best non-conference schedules for a mid-major in the country. You look at the fact that they're hitting the road to play Memphis. They are going to be playing Bradley. They have neutrals against Minnesota, Colorado. They'll face either Nevada or Washington. They have Mississippi State. They'll be on the road at St. Louis, hosting Loyola Chicago. This is a really good non-conference schedule for the Dons and sets themselves up well as we get into November.
And, had you not mentioned that it was going to be one of the best mid-major schedules in the country, I would have led with, I don't like it, I love it. Like Chris Gerlofson and the Dons are welcoming all the smoke, and you have to. The thing is, when you're trying to make a name for yourself, when you're trying to be a team that gets back to the NCAA tournament for the second time in this decade, you're going to have to punch above your weight in terms of your scheduling. I think USF recognizes the moment. They obviously, when you're losing a guy like Malik Thomas, that's a big deal, obviously. But now you still want to sustain the momentum that you've had coming off the Jamari Bouye and Khalil Shabazz years. So I like the schedule for USF. I think they have ample opportunity, which is that's what you want more than anything with the schedule. Do you have the opportunity to go make a name for yourself, make a resume, so that if you don't get it done against Gonzaga and St. Mary's, that the committee, much like 2022, will say, I want the USF Dons in the dance. And I do think this schedule does a great job. And I know Chris Gerlofson, he doesn't shy away from high-level competition. He's someone who's going to welcome it. He's someone who's going to motivate his team to be ready to go seize that moment. And I know there's some good Dons players that are going to try and rise to the occasion and try and be that team that goes back to the dance for the first time in a few years.
The one thing I really like about this schedule is the fact that so many of the big opportunities are away from home. Like the fact that they have to play a true road game against Memphis, that they are going to be at the Sanford Pentagon to play Minnesota, the fact that they're going to be at the Acrisure for Colorado and either Nevada or Washington, playing a neutral site against Mississippi State in Mississippi, hitting the road at St. Louis. The fact that all of their big games are away from San Francisco, away from the Chase Center, I think bodes very well for this team, for what USF is looking at right now. And again, it gives them a lot of chances at the Apple. Like they don't have to win them all now. They can, if you look at those 5-6 games, if they can go 3-3 in those, if they can get 4 wins out of that, that is going to do a lot for their resume. And those losses are not going to hurt the resume. The problem is with USF, as we've seen over the last couple of years, they've had the opportunities. Last year, they had those opportunities, but they were only able to get the Boise State game at home. And so they missed on the Memphis game. They missed Loyola Chicago. They had opportunities to get some of these bigger wins and just came up short. And that is something that USF is going to need to get over the hump on. We know that over the last few years, they've taken care of business against the teams they're supposed to. Mm-hmm. They've beaten everybody who is, as we would say, is below them. Is like not as good as this USF team, but the teams who are right in their ballpark, who might be a little bit better on paper, that is where they have struggled. And that is where they have to kind of they have to be able to make that jump if they hope to get back to the dance. But at the very least, as you mentioned, like Chris Gerlofson does not shy away from any of these challenges. And this USF squad is in very good position early on as we get into the season to get enough wins to have their name be mentioned at least a few times when we come to Selection Sunday.
100%. And I think the part you mentioned is finding a way to stay within games within the Power Four. So like last year, it was like somewhere in Florida, and they played Clemson and just didn't have it the first night of that tournament. And then you go turn around, you're playing Fordham the next day. So not only did you lose to Clemson, you lose an opportunity to go have another signature game. So you go to Acrisure, you hope that you get the best draw possible there, depending on how you perform. And now we'll just kind of wait and see where the cards fall. But at USF, like we mentioned, can they win with the opportunities that are right in front of them? Memphis, an entirely gettable team on any given day. So I'm excited to see what the Dons do.
Now, the next one, Washington State also has a really good schedule. The more you kind of dive into what's going to be happening here, the Cougars, they're going to be home for Idaho to kick it off. But then they're on the road at Davidson. They're hosting Washington, who many people believe is going to be a top 20 team this year. They're at the Maui, and so they will get plenty of opportunity there. They do open with Chaminade, which obviously is not the best opening draw, but then they'll either get Arizona State or Texas. Boise State, NC State, Seton Hall, USC are all in that tournament. They're going to be on the road for Bradley again, on the road for USC. They'll be playing Eastern Washington in Spokane, home for Nevada. This is a really good schedule that Washington State has put together. Now, we kind of talked a little bit about where they are in the preseason rankings as far as how much that this team is going to have to overcome versus what we saw a year ago. Brand new team, brand new roster. Maybe they didn't do as well as we thought they might in the portal, but this team is going to get plenty of opportunities to prove itself, and this could go very well. Again, like, they don't have to win them all to really prove themselves, but it could also go very poorly if this team doesn't kind of figure it out quickly.
I do think the build back respect is kind of like the phrase I think that I associate with this Washington State schedule. So last year, I think it was a year that many people wanted to forget in some respects. Like Washington State, they started out really hot. You beat Boise State, you're feeling good. You go on the road, you beat Nevada when Nevada was looking good. And then it just all kind of fell apart at the seams after that. So I think this year, when you think of building what David Riley wants to envision for his program, build back respect is the one thing I think Washington State is trying to do with this schedule. And you mentioned at Davidson kind of has to figure out some gremlins of their own. I think St. Thomas is honestly a pretty formidable team. Like on their own, you think of them in the Summit League. I'm pretty sure like they're not a team where you think of St. Thomas and they're the big bad dogs, but they're a very capable team that can come out and bite you. So I respect them scheduling St. Thomas. Obviously, Washington, they're going to have to get a lot better under Danny Sprinkle. We'll kind of just wait and see on that. It's another one of those unproven teams at this point. And then, like you said, once they get to the Maui Invitational through the USC stretch, I think that's the one thing where you kind of understand what this team's going to be, because you're going to have pretty solid games for a good few weeks in a row. And when Washington State, when I mentioned build back respect, that requires not only competing, but obviously trying to come out the other side with some wins. But at minimum, not letting go of the rope, because obviously that was the big deal last year when the Cougars just couldn't stop that from happening. So they don't let go of the rope here. They are competitive. Even if they lose some of those games and go 500 in that stretch, I think that's all well and fine, because you're just trying to build back respect.
Yeah, I mean, the more and more I'm like, this Washington State schedule is like turning into a gauntlet when you start to think about it. The Cougars have a lot to still work on the court. Like, again, like a lot of new faces, still kind of a lot of unknowns of what this squad's going to look like. And there's not going to be many off nights, quote unquote off nights in this schedule. So this is where like they are going to have to bring it every single night. They're going to have to be on their game almost every single night through this. Obviously, it's not a Gonzaga type schedule, not like that sort of gauntlet, but for a team that's trying to kind of build back and get back to respectability, get back to the conversation where they were a tournament team a couple of years ago. They have the schedule to raise some eyebrows, to kind of like pay attention if they get some of these wins, but it's also thinking about like, hopefully they don't wear down enough by the time conference play rolls around that they've kind of already kind of exhausted all of that energy, because as we saw, it's conference play last year was where they started to wear down. The further we got into WCC play, they really just ran out of gas. Part of that, obviously, largely injuries. There's also just, again, like thinking about just the lack of roster size that they had at that stage. And the who was also injured, obviously, as well. But Washington State is going to give themselves plenty of chances. This is a really good schedule for David Riley in year 2, heading the program. And it's going to be fascinating to watch how this Washington team is able to kind of roll through the early part of this year.
Yeah, I'm in 100% of the boat. And I think when you think of, I don't kind of want to describe them as a box of chocolates, but something in the vein of, okay, this could be a gift, it could be a blessing, could be a curse. I kind of want to wait and see. As Washington State, I would argue, top 3 most intriguing team in the WCC this year.
Now, the last one we have is Portland. And so the Pilots obviously are in a very different position than either Washington State or USF when it comes to what the outlook and what the goals are kind of coming into the season, because this team is really trying to just gain a level of respectability again. And the schedule that they've brought out, I think, gives you some opportunities. You think about, there's UC Davis is on the schedule. That's a good one for them to be playing at home. Wyoming on the road. Mentioned St. Thomas in the Washington State schedule. St. Thomas is going to be playing at Portland. Long Beach State is on the schedule. And then toward the end, 3 games on the road that are going to be big challenges for this Pilots team. Stanford, Oregon, UC Santa Barbara, Kent State is thrown in there as well. There's a lot of opportunities for Portland to, I think, gain some experience. There's definitely going to be some tough love and rough patches in this schedule for the Pilots, but this could at the very least prep them to be a little bit more formidable once they get into WCC play.
And I kind of want to draw the comparison to last year. I think you look at the game at Oregon, like everyone expected them to lose by 1,000,000 points, and then here they are. Probably should have won that game, to be quite honest. And you see the Ducks back on the schedule again. You're like, okay, maybe they can strike magic once again. But like you mentioned, I think they're going to take some lumps in this schedule, especially towards the back end. I do think when you consider Portland, like when you consider their scheduling like perspective, it's a chicken or the egg. Because of where they stand, they're going to be the recipient of a lot of bye games. Because of also where they stand, they're not going to be able to schedule the elite mid-majors or upper echelon mid-majors because they don't want their resumes to fall because of the Portland Pilots. So it's a chicken and the egg situation. So when you kind of look at the schedule, you're like, oh, well, they're not really they don't challenge themselves at the beginning. It's like, well, you have to understand where they are. And so like you mentioned, UC Davis, Wyoming, that makes sense for who Portland is right now. And then you look at the Portland Invitational. Remember, I remember when the PK was out there pretty much a little bit a while ago. Lots of elite teams were making the way out to the Pacific Northwest, but I like St. Thomas on the schedule a lot. And then the stretch from facing Long Beach State to UC Santa Barbara, I do think it's a formidable one in the sense of you're gonna find out what kind of resilience the Pilots have this season. You're kind of gonna find out what Shante Leggins really has to work with because you're gonna face significant adversity in a lot of those games. And more than anything, even if you don't come out with enough wins as you would like, you're going to find out what this team is made of. And I think that says a lot for what Portland is at this time. And obviously all Pilot fans don't want it to be that way, but that's what it is. And if Shante can figure it out, it'll keep him around. If you can't figure it out with this schedule, and who knows where the fork in the road leads.
Yeah. At the very least, I think there's going to be a moment or two in this non-conference where Portland does surprise us, where Portland does kind of snag one of these wins. Now, it may not be the Oregon game, but I think that there's going to be somewhere in this non-conference that where we look up and Portland has won a big game in a dramatic fashion, whatever else. They were in a lot of close games in the non-conference last year. And this gives them enough opportunity to, one, really kind of gel this new group of guys that they have with the Pilots, and then also just kind of give them enough opportunity, enough challenges that once they get to conference play, they'll be ready for the challenges ahead of them. Like you think about, like, again, obviously they're not going to beat the Gonzagas, the St. Mary's, the USFs, but they'll be ready for LMU. They'll be ready for Washington State. They'll be ready for Pacific and Pepperdine. Like they'll be ready for that non-top tier of the league, and this is where then they could steal a few here and there if they're able to kind of like weather the storm in the non-conference.
Yeah, I'm in that boat for sure. And I think you think of teams that need to take care of business, like we know Oregon State's Gremlins on the road. They lost at Portland last year. So can Portland defend home court once again if the Beavers are in town? Like you mentioned, going on the road at LMU, can they find a way to punch above their weight? And I think that's the big thing, because you look at other teams that were right with them, Pacific, San Diego, we're touting them as teams that will make the jump. Can Portland be one that takes it with them? I'm not 100% convinced at this moment, but if nothing else, we're going to find out exactly what the team is made of late December.
Yeah. So we'll keep an eye on the Pilots. We'll see what their outlook is going to be. Obviously, we'll get to their season preview, their team preview a little on later in September as we get a little bit closer to basketball season. Now, one of the other updates that came out was that it was announced that St. Mary's will be playing Boise State in a neutral site in Idaho Falls again. For the third straight year, the Gales will be heading out there to take on Boise State. And this is I have to get on my soapbox about this one, because it is not I like the fact that they got Boise State again. It is not about that. My argument here, my soapbox here is, why is this game in Idaho Falls again? For the third straight year, St. Mary's will be heading out to Idaho to play a neutral site game, not really a neutral site game, against the Broncos. And this is one where it's like, I get going out there year one. I get going out there year two. You couldn't have gotten the game any closer for year three of this. And obviously it wasn't a 3-year deal or 3-year agreement. This has been a one-off. But this game couldn't have been in Sacramento. This game couldn't have been in
Salt Lake.
Oakland. Like you couldn't have gotten this game closer to the Bay Area, closer to your own home, because this feels just so lopsided on like the who has the advantage here. Because now St. Mary's has lost the first 2 games, and this is not in my head about the fact that they've lost the first 2. This is like, hey, St. Mary's and Boise State in a lot of ways are looked at in similar ways when it comes to their status in college basketball. Like both of these programs are high level mid-major programs. Both of them have, St. Mary's obviously had a little bit more tournament success than Boise State has had. But these 2 teams are constantly some of the tougher matchups in college basketball. And the fact that St. Mary's hasn't been able to get Boise anywhere closer to California just frustrates me to no end that we can't get them anywhere near the state.
You should ask USF how to get that done. They clearly they got that done last year, so you can go over to the other side of the bay and kind of figure out what special sauce they had on that one.
How much more did they have to pay Boise State to get them in the building?
Well, and once they got them in the building, they beat them up pretty good.
Yeah.
So the one thing I definitely want to stress is like I'd want to know what those negotiations were like. And you mentioned Oakland. It could have been like Oracle, for example. Could have been at Golden One. Obviously we don't know the availabilities of those arenas. And I'll throw like a third base wrench out there. What if they hosted it at the Lake Tahoe Arena, the one that's right there in South Lake Tahoe? Like if you wanted to like make it bougie like that, that was potentially on the table. So I think of something like that, and I'm in agreement. Why 3 times in Idaho Falls? And Idaho Falls not dramatically far from Boise. So St. Mary's, it's good that they have Boise on the schedule, but in Idaho Falls, it's like, okay, it's like every time people are playing one-offs at the Orleans before the WCC tournament in December. Like, do you have to do this? No. Like, if it got moved to Denver, if it got moved to Salt Lake, if it got moved to, well, I don't want to say Laramie would not be good enough, but you get the point. Like, there were other options available, and I do think it would have made more sense to at least explore those options before returning to Idaho Falls, and maybe they did before we weren't in the room.
And obviously, there's always the conversation about the quote unquote neutral games, which are really home games in a lot of scenarios across college basketball. And this one, where it's like, at the very least, like if you've done this 3 times now, it's like, you know what? Can we just play them at Boise State then? Like, just let's actually make this a real home game for them, a real road game, as opposed to being the neutral, because that would at least feel better to me, that you're getting a little bit more credit for heading out there to play them in that opportunity. And I know, like, I think they've still been a quad 1 opportunity in both of the first 2 years. But yeah, the fact that it's happened 3 years in a row in Idaho Falls as a neutral site, like, I need them to pull it back to the Bay Area a little bit, especially now that this is the last year Boise State as a quote unquote mid-major, now that they'll be Pac-12 a year from now. And what is that conversation going to be like? It almost feels like at that stage, it'll never actually get back to the Bay Area if we have to play Boise.
Yeah, I mean, you want to just move things around just for the sake of freshness. I think you do this too often to get stale. Like, I think Santa Clara, they go to the Jack Jones Classic at the Dollar Loan Center every year. I'm like, why? Like, what compels you to go back there each and every year? So I definitely shared the gripe in a certain sense of going to Idaho Falls, but I do think regardless, you're going to want those Boise State Broncos on the schedule for as long as possible. It's a resume building win. Like, it can be. Yeah. And like, you don't necessarily, because you don't have to go out on the road and be scheduling Alabama. Like, it's not necessary to do those things when you're facing a team like Boise.
All right. So funny you mentioned that sort of thing, because as we're going to do a little bit of buy or sell here, and one of the topics that always kind of rattles in my head, and we'll go back and forth on this one. So first on this is the idea that, does St. Mary's need a quote unquote marquee name on the schedule? Obviously, we know that they've been able to schedule very well. like the numbers like it, the net likes it, all the metrics seem to point in the direction that St. Mary's obviously does a very good job on the scheduling front. Their seating, everything points to that direction. But do they need the marquee name on that schedule? The Alabamas, UCLA's, whatnot.
I sell that notion, mainly in the sense of I end up asking a rhetorical question. Well, what's your goal really? Like, what are you trying to establish just beyond name brand here? Because we know what St. Mary's is. Like, nothing changes if they play Alabama, and that maybe gets them to the Sweet 16. And I know that's a big deal, like when you take a big scope at it. But what ultimately are you trying to prove? Because you're not going to change if you're playing Alabama, if you're playing Duke, if you're playing UCLA. You're not going to change who you are. So I kind of asked the rhetorical question: what's the goal? Because mid 2010 St. Mary's very good, but they sandbag the schedule, and sometimes you miss out on the NCAA tournament when you didn't think you deserved to. So I think of the way they schedule now. I think it's perfectly fine with the way they schedule now. You have teams that are in and around you. Like, people didn't expect USC to be as bad as they were last year. When you think of it like that, New Mexico, very capable team, made the NCAA tournament. Arizona State started out hot, then faded off pretty quick. So just so many different teams and different dynamics at play. And I think St. Mary's dynamic, they don't need those types of games. To me, it's eye candy. Like, whether it's on the road, if they go to, for example, they're in the battle for Atlantis, that's cool. Like, that's fine. But you don't need to schedule a one-off. You don't need to go to Intuit Dome to play UCLA. That's just, to me, it's not necessary, especially for what St. Mary's goals are. And I don't think they'll learn anything dramatically different about who they are, because they're not going to change who they are. And that's not a bad thing, but I just don't personally see it.
So here's where I am in the buy category, because the eye candy does have value, and here's where the value is. And maybe this is me thinking as more like from the fan perspective, because this is less on the maybe less on the basketball front than it is the fan front, because it's hard to get excited about Florida Atlantic. It's harder to get excited about Boise than it would be if, say, it was UCLA, or if it was Alabama, or if it was Florida, or if it was North Carolina. It's like the name brand excites a fan base, and it helps with the branding, helps with the recognition, because again, like when you think about getting to the NCAA tournament and who they end up playing, not in the first weekend, which is a lot of times the type of teams they have on the up and down the schedule. Those first round games, they've been a 5 seed, they're playing a 12 seed, the VCUs of the world. Guess what? They've had kind of the VCUs on the schedule. They have no problem with them. What they've had the problem with are those teams in the second weekend, which by and large are your brand name teams. And that is where they at least need to know what they're getting, like what they need to work on against that level of a team. And that helps on the branding front. It helps on the recognition front of, like, if you had one of those teams. Now, St. Mary's did play Houston a few years back, and that was a game where I think that was a 5-point game at the finish, when Houston was the number 1 team in the country. That opened a lot of eyes and gave a lot of people a better perspective of what St. Mary's was and who they were, even in a loss. Like, so there is some level of value to that, because if you go into the NCAA tournament, you think about brand and like name recognition. Yes, everyone knows who St. Mary's is, but also everybody knows St. Mary's doesn't really get by the second round of the tournament, at least not in the last, we're going on 15 years. So that's where I think that there needs to be some level of other like marquee game, because I can, as a basketball junkie, I know that when I look at the St. Mary's schedule and I see tough mid-major, tough mid-major, tough mid-major, tough mid-major, that obviously this is a good schedule. I know that, but your casual fan does not know that. They don't know that when they go out and play the Akron's likely going to win their conference. But especially out here on the West Coast, like there's just not that level of general recognition of who's good and who's not without the brand name attached to it. So I think there is still value. So that's why I buy the notion that like there needs to be at least some level of that recognition, some level of those marquee names.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the perspective, and believe me, I do. I do think it's part of the chicken or the egg. Once again, it's you play a big time team and then you lose by 10 points. You can't run the offense as smooth as you like. Well, then what? Because you're going to face another one of those teams in the second round, third round, whatever it may be anyway. So to me, it's like, okay, well, it's not like the NBA where you can go trade for a player and you have deadlines, buyouts, all that, veterans on the free agent market. It's not, at least not yet. College athletics isn't like that. So for me, it's like, okay, you learn that, but now what? Like, you are who you are, and Randy Bennett's not going to suddenly turn into a 90-point up-tempo team just because he wants to counteract how Alabama plays, at least in my opinion. And that's just, again, just my opinion.
No, but hey, but Randy's maybe one of the best when you give him prep time. So if he knows what to expect and what doesn't work, then there's already at least a built-in game plan of what could work.
Fair enough.
All right, so getting off my St. Mary's soapbox now. Buy or sell, Ryan Beasley is USF's most important player.
I will buy it, and I will buy it once again, mainly because I think he's the big guy. He's the guy who could change the ceiling of the team. And you think of what Tyrone Riley is, very consistent, someone who's raising his own game, someone who may be called in the NBA draft next year, and the first Don drafted in a very, very long time. I do think Ryan Beasley's the guy where if he can unlock
Jonathan Mobile.
Damn. Oh well.
No, second in a long time.
Yeah. It's been a while before Jonathan Mopo. That's true. My apologies to the Dons fans on that one. To be quite honest, Ryan Beasley is the guy who can explode. He's the guy who I think has the biggest explosiveness on the roster as it stands. Everyone looks at Tyrone Riley and his athleticism, and rightfully so. But I think you looked at the stretch of games that Ryan Beasley played towards the end of last season. He put the team on his back at times. He's someone who shouldered the load. He's someone who can absolutely get hot in a moment's notice. And I think if he carries that and you kind of internalize that and push it forward and you say, okay, we're going to go far because of this guy. I think Ryan Beasley's the guy who turns up the wick. I think Ryan Beasley's the guy who changes the game for USF. If he's hot, the team's hot. I do think it ends up being better for USF in the long run if he's the guy who's going off. And we've all seen what he can do in smaller sample sizes as the lead guy. I'm intrigued to see what he can do now as one of the lead guys with a bigger sample size.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's also not just the fact of what we saw when he explodes, because he does have the greater kind of ceiling on that front, because he can turn into a 20, 30 point score on a moment's notice. But it's also because of what we have seen, unfortunately, on the injury side. Like, if Ryan Beasley is banged up like he has been in each of his first 2 years, this USF team is going to struggle because they do not have that depth at the guard position that we've seen over the last couple of years. Like, Brian Beasley, the last 2 seasons, has been that backup role. So he's had Marcus Williams in front of him. He's had Malik Thomas in front of him, and they've been able to carry the load. And Ryan Beasley, when he goes, he can add just that extra. But now that he is going to be one of the main guys, his health is going to be so important for this USF team. So, like, I buy, yes, that he's their most important, because if he can stay healthy, this team is going to go. If he is banged up for any extended period of time, this is going to seriously, I think, hurt USF's chances of getting back to the dance.
And I think you look at the NCAA tournament as it stands, it's guards. Guards win NCAA tournament games. And we think of a few years ago, Jamari Bouye had one of the best NCAA tournament games I've ever seen from someone from a West Coast school. And you make no bones about that. Ryan Beasley can be someone who can go onto that big stage, and he's going to relish it. He's not going to shy away, but he has to be out there first.
All right. So our last buy or sell, this one is last week I did an all WCC team for the 2020s with our good friend Andy Patton over at Locked On Zags. And for reference, like, you can go and see it on Instagram. We talked about it on Locked On Zags, whatnot. The buy or sell here is that my team was better than Andy's team. That first team being Logan Johnson, Corey Kispert, Suggs, Timmy, and Jalen Williams. And Andy's being Holmgren, Marshallonis, Pods, Suggs, and Timmy. The buy or sell, who had the better first team?
Yeah, I do think I'll have to roll with your team on that one. I just think it has a lot more explosiveness, to be quite honest. And I do think you consider spacing matters, and I do think team matters in that respect. And I'm not sure Goose's strengths would be accentuated in Andy's team or as opposed to yours. So that's something where I'd be like, okay, you know what? Let me let me get Zach's team a little bit of love right there.
Yeah, the one thing I think our biggest difference, and again, like this is total preference, is that I had Logan Johnson all the way on my first team, and Andy didn't have Logan Johnson at all.
Oh yeah,
on
and
either the first, second, or third teams.
And I know if I had it my way, there's definitely some things where I'd get pretty much stoked to the fire on. So we'll see about that.
So do you have kind of like a first team that pops in your head of like the 5 guys over this first half decade for an all WCC team?
I do, and it's largely the same as one of your guys' teams, but there is one guy who I have a very personal affinity for, and I just think that, despite maybe the results against some of the big time teams, I just think if he had the ball in his hand, he's going to give you buckets, and there's nothing you can do about it. So to start with, Jalen Suggs, all right, that's on there, no surprise, whatever. Drew Timme, he's on there, no surprise, at least in my opinion. I will back Corey Kispert on there. I think you need a spacing forward, and I do think he does a great job, and someone that you got to have out there. Jalen Williams, you think of just the versatility that comes with a guy like J-Dub and kind of how it's kind of accelerated exponentially once he got in the league, but I do think he rose as Santa Clara rose, and I do think it's critical to point to him and give him credit for being part of that rise of Santa Clara and how they are standing now. And while they didn't get to an NCAA tournament, and that's something that will be regretful for some time, it's something that you have to recognize that was a turning point in the way Santa Clara was viewed holistically as a program compared to years past. And the last guy, my personal affinity, give me Jamari Bouye on the first team, WCC all-decade team to this point. There are not many people, if any, in that conference where if they had the ball in their hand and they're going for a step-back wing three, then I was like, we are screwed. And, respectfully, I've seen Jamari give Jalen buckets. Like it does not matter who he's sizing up. Jamari Bouye, you saw the game against Murray State. Jamari Bouye is a guy who I want on my team. He's a dog. He's a grinder. He's someone who he can take over a game, as we've seen. And I'm sure you've seen on your end from St. Mary's, you're like, look, St. Mary's is playing good against USF, but you have to corral Jamari Bouye at all costs. And that's someone where I'm like, yes, please. And, if I ever I saw yours and Andy's second, third teams, like I got some guys who I'm like, okay, they deserve a little bit more love compared to some others. And even some I'd get probably crucified for putting an honorable mention.
Who were some of the guys that we didn't have maybe at all that entered yours? Because obviously, like we even talked about we left off the Ada Mahaney's, we left off a Cam Shelton, we left off some really good names off of these 3 teams. But it does speak to the depth of this conference of some of the names that rolled through over the last 5 years. Was there one that kind of we both missed that you had on one of your teams?
There was one I was pretty surprised with, and I put him in there because he was just a pain to play all the time, no matter what. Tommy Kuhse, for me, was very impactful, very, very impactful player, very smart player. And you peel back the curtain a little bit, he almost made Goose expendable. And we see how good Goose turned into. His resurgence was a big deal because of the way Tommy Kuhse kind of played him in. So I had Tommy Kuhse on my third team, and someone else I snuck in there, and I went heavy back and forth because he doesn't get the shine because his teams weren't as good, but I do think he specifically was good. I put Colby Ross in my third team. So I think give a little bit of respect to the former Pepperdine wave, Colby Ross. And I think he snuck in there. He's literally my last pick in the third team. And there are some guys on honorable mention that you can easily make the case for them. But I was like,
Colby Ross was one of those guys. I was debating back and forth with him because I think it's his greatest moment, the best game I saw came before this 5-year window. It was against, I think it was in 2019 when he and Jordan Ford went back and forth at the WCC tournament where I think it was Ford had 43, Ross had 40, and it was just a ridiculous game. The two of them trading baskets toward the end. But Colby Ross, one of the best in recent Pepperdine history to come out of that program.
Yeah, and I'm surprised you didn't put Tommy Kuhse in there, because you think of the way he ran the offense with Matthias Toss. I think that's something that, when you consider the way how nimble some of St. Mary's bigs can be, to get the most out of Matthias Toss, I think Tommy Kuhse was the right guy. And you think of the way he built up Goose. I think you look at his impact across the board, and I think that's someone that has earned the right considering where that program has gone. And, I had Kuzi and Goose on the same team, despite Goose's Player of the Year awards, because I think you have to consider where they came from.
Yeah. And that's a really good call on Tommy Kuzi. I mean, obviously love Kuzi, and I think it was just like the years of success wasn't sustained. Like it was like the one year. And I think that's always a difficult challenge when you're thinking about these sorts of like all-time teams. It's all right, within what years, which year sustained success versus one great year, or even for some of the guys who are only in the league for 1 year. How do you weigh that? Like the Jonathan Mobos, like how do you kind of weigh their success because of the one solo year versus someone who's been here for 4 or 5 years and been able to build a full career? And while you're thinking about just like the peak, there's also the progress and the process of how they got there and what they meant to their program over years versus a single shot. But all right, we're going to wrap up this episode. So be sure to follow along on social media at unofficial WCC pod. Subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Next episode, we are going to start into our team previews. San Diego and Seattle will be our first two, and we will be interviewing San Diego head coach Steve Lavin as part of that. So a lot of great stuff is going to be coming up as we are now in the real countdown to college basketball season. Next episode will be in September. So we're already flipping the calendar. The summer is over. Fall is nearly here. Even if it's heating up in the Bay Area, which is typical, we're getting close to playing real games, real basketball. So it's going to be exciting the next few months as we get to the season. All right. Any last words, Thomas?
Yeah, I was about to say, you said it's turning into fall. I was going to say Bay Area summer is just about to start. So I'm very excited. Good times to be here. And look, it's getting to be go time, and it's getting to be to find out what the business of each of these teams are. And media day is coming up fairly soon. Like we're excited to get to know some of these, not only these players, but as people, because it's not just about basketball at times. And we're excited to bring that to you.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Again, be sure to subscribe, follow, all those things. We'll be back next week with another episode, starting with the team previews. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you later.